The perfect romance. Sarah had always believed in love, the kind that sweeps you off your feet, the kind that makes you feel like the world fades away when you're with the right person. And when she met Daniel, she thought she had finally found it. It was on a crisp autumn evening when their paths first crossed. Sarah had been sitting alone in a quaint little cafe, sipping her favorite caramel latte and losing herself in the pages of a novel. The soft hum of the city outside, mixed with the gentle chatter of the cafe's patrons, created the perfect atmosphere. That's when Daniel walked in. Tall, confident, and effortlessly charming, he carried an air of mystery that immediately caught her attention. He ordered a black coffee, glanced around, and as if drawn by fate, his eyes met Sarah's. A smile flickered across his lips, warm, inviting, and full of a quiet confidence. "Is that a good book?" he asked, motioning toward the novel in her hands. Sarah, taken aback by his directness yet intrigued, smiled. "One of my favorites." From that moment on, their story unfolded like a beautiful fairy tale. Their first conversation had been effortless, flowing like a river, and before she knew it, they had spent hours talking about everything: books, travel, childhood memories, and dreams for the future. Daniel seemed perfect in every way. He had an adventurous spirit, a sharp wit, and an undeniable charm that made Sarah feel like she was the only woman in the world. He was successful, well-spoken, and always knew the right thing to say to make her heart flutter. Their dates were filled with spontaneous adventures, midnight drives to nowhere, candlelit dinners, and long walks under the stars. He listened to her like no one else ever had. When she spoke, he didn't just hear her words, he understood her. He remembered the little things, like how she took her coffee, or the way she always hummed a song when she was nervous. Sarah had never felt this way before. With Daniel, love wasn't just a feeling. It was an experience, a whirlwind of emotions that made her believe she had found the one. Her friends adored him. Her family welcomed him with open arms. Everything felt right, as if the universe had conspired to bring them together. One evening, as they sat on the rooftop of her apartment building, watching the city lights twinkle like stars, Daniel reached for her hand. His fingers intertwined with hers, sending warmth through her skin. "You make me feel like the luckiest man in the world, Sarah," he whispered. Her heart pounded in her chest. "I love you," she murmured, barely above a whisper. He smiled, pulling her closer. "I love you too, more than you'll ever know." In that moment, she felt like she had everything she had ever wanted, but what she didn't know was that the man she loved wasn't who he claimed to be, and soon she would learn the truth. Dreams of forever. Sarah had always believed that love should feel like home, a safe place, warm and unshakable. And with Daniel, that's exactly how it felt. Their love wasn't just passionate, it was effortless, the kind of connection that made the future seem bright and full of endless possibilities. They spent countless nights dreaming about the life they would build together. Curled up on the couch with glasses of wine in hand, they spoke about everything: the places they would visit, the home they would create, and the love story they would continue to write. "I can see us living in a house by the beach," Daniel mused one evening, his fingers absent-mindedly tracing circles on Sarah's palm. "Something simple but cozy. Big windows so we can watch the sunrise every morning." Sarah smiled at the thought. "And a little garden," she added. "I'll grow lavender and roses, and maybe a hammock where we can just lie down and listen to the waves." Daniel chuckled. "You and your romantic ideas." "You love them," she teased. "I love you," he corrected, his voice soft yet certain. Talk of marriage came naturally. There was no pressure, no need for dramatic proposals or grand gestures, just the quiet certainty that they were meant to spend their lives together. Sarah imagined their wedding, a small ceremony in an open field with fairy lights hanging from the trees and music playing softly in the background. "I don't need anything fancy," she told him one day. "Just you, me, and the people we love." "That sounds perfect," he agreed. "But can we have chocolate cake?" Sarah laughed. "I knew you'd say that." Beyond the wedding, they dreamed of adventures. Daniel wanted to take her to Paris, where they would stroll along the Seine, eat croissants at a little cafe, and get lost in art museums. She longed to see Japan in the spring, walking under cherry blossoms, hand in hand with him. "We'll make it happen," Daniel promised. "All of it." She believed him. How could she not? He had never given her a reason to doubt him. They spoke of children, 2, maybe 3. "A boy and a girl," Sarah imagined. "The girl will be just like me, and the boy will have your smile." Daniel grinned. "I hope they get your heart. It's the most beautiful thing about you." With each passing day, the dream felt more real. They started saving for a future home, discussing what city they might settle in. They browsed engagement rings in passing, though no official proposal had been made. To Sarah, it wasn't a question of if, it was only a matter of when. She had never been more sure of anything in her life, but certainty is a fragile thing, because soon Sarah would uncover a truth that would shatter every dream they had built together. Whispers of doubt. Sarah had never been the jealous or suspicious type. She believed in trust, in giving love freely without constantly questioning it. But as the months passed, little things about Daniel began to feel off. It started small, almost insignificant. A forgotten detail here, a slight contradiction there. One evening, they were having dinner at their favorite Italian restaurant when Daniel mentioned a childhood vacation in Greece. "It was incredible," he said, swirling his wine. "My parents took me to Santorini when I was 13. The blue rooftops, the white buildings. I still remember how the sunset looked over the water." Sarah smiled. "You told me last month you'd never been outside the country." Daniel's hand paused midair. Then he laughed. "Did I? That's strange. I must have been thinking about somewhere else. Maybe I was mixing up stories." It was a simple mistake, one Sarah could easily let go of. But then there were the phone calls. Late at night, Daniel's phone would buzz, and he would quickly silence it. When Sarah asked, he'd wave it off. "Work emails," he'd say. "Nothing important." One evening, she glanced at his screen just as he flipped it over. The name displayed wasn't saved. It was just a string of numbers. "Who was that?" she asked casually. "No one," Daniel replied too quickly. "Just a wrong number." The words settled uncomfortably in her chest. Then there were the weekends when he would suddenly become unavailable. "I have a last-minute work trip," he'd tell her. "It's boring stuff. I'll call you when I'm back." But the calls were short, and his answers were vague. Still, Sarah pushed the doubts aside. She told herself that Daniel was a busy man, that forgetting details was human, that missed calls didn't mean anything. Love required trust, and she loved him, so she trusted him. Until one evening, while scrolling through old photos on her phone, she came across a picture she had taken of Daniel a few months ago. He was laughing, holding her hand, the city lights glowing behind him. She smiled, reminiscing. Then something caught her eye. The watch on his wrist. Sarah frowned. She remembered that watch. She had complimented it the first time she saw him wear it, and he had told her it was a gift from his father, something deeply sentimental. But that night, as she stared at the picture, she recalled a different conversation from just a few days ago. They had been walking through a mall, and he had stopped at a display case, admiring an almost identical watch. "This one's nice," he had said. "I've been thinking about getting something like this." Sarah had laughed at the time. "What about the one your dad gave you?" And Daniel had looked at her, completely blank. "My dad never gave me a watch." A cold chill ran through her. It was nothing. It had to be nothing. But the whispers of doubt were growing louder. A mysterious stranger. It was a chilly evening when Sarah first saw him, the stranger who would change everything. She had just stepped out of the cafe where she and Daniel often met after work. The night air was crisp, the streetlights casting long shadows on the pavement. She pulled her coat tighter around her, her thoughts still lingering on the odd inconsistencies in Daniel's stories. That was when she noticed the man. He was standing across the street watching her. At first, she thought she was imagining things. But as she turned down a quieter street, she heard footsteps behind her. They weren't hurried, just steady, deliberate. Sarah's heart began to pound. She quickened her pace, glancing over her shoulder. The man didn't look threatening, mid-30s, neatly dressed, a serious expression on his face. But there was something unsettling about the way he watched her, as if he knew her. Finally, she couldn't ignore it any longer. She spun around. "Can I help you?" The man hesitated, then took a cautious step forward. "You're Sarah, right?" Her breath caught. "Who are you?" He exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck as if debating what to say. "Listen, I don't want to scare you, but I need to warn you about Daniel." The name hit her like a slap. "Excuse me?" The man looked around as if checking for unwanted ears, then lowered his voice. "He's not who you think he is." Sarah felt the ground shift beneath her. She had spent months brushing off her own doubts, convincing herself that Daniel was just forgetful or stressed. But here was a complete stranger, validating the fears she had buried. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice firmer than she felt. The man sighed. "Look, I get it. You love him, but you need to be careful." Sarah shook her head. "This is ridiculous. Who even are you?" "My name is Mark," he said, "and I know Daniel. Or at least, I know the man he used to be." Sarah stared at him, her pulse roaring in her ears. "What do you mean, used to be?" Mark hesitated, then took out his phone and tapped on the screen. A moment later, he held it out to her. Sarah's stomach twisted as she looked at the photo. It was Daniel, but not the Daniel she knew. His hair was shorter, his expression harder. He stood next to another woman, his arm wrapped around her waist. The date on the photo was from 2 years ago. "He was engaged," Mark said quietly, "to my sister." Sarah's vision blurred. "That's not possible." Mark's jaw tightened. "It is." And he disappeared from her life just like that. No explanation, no warning. Sarah felt like she couldn't breathe. The doubts she had buried were no longer whispers. They were screaming. Digging for answers. Sarah couldn't sleep. Mark's words haunted her, replaying over and over in her mind. "He's not who you think he is." The photo on his phone, the one with Daniel and another woman, was burned into her memory. She tried to push it away, to tell herself that Mark was just some bitter ex-brother-in-law with an agenda. But deep down, she knew better. The inconsistencies, the secrecy, the late-night calls, it all pointed to something being wrong. She needed to know the truth. At first, she started small. A simple internet search. Daniel Carter background. Nothing unusual came up. No social media, no LinkedIn, no digital footprint except for a few vague work-related mentions. That was odd in itself. In an age where everyone left some kind of mark online, Daniel was practically a ghost. So she dug deeper. She searched for the company he claimed to work for. Their website listed employees, but his name wasn't among them. Confused, she called the number on the website. "Hi," she said, forcing a polite tone. "I was just wondering if Daniel Carter still works with your firm?" A pause. Then a woman's voice replied, "I'm sorry, but we don't have anyone by that name." Sarah felt her stomach drop. Maybe he was using a different name at work. Maybe he was freelancing. Maybe... She didn't want to believe the alternative. Her curiosity turned into an obsession. She combed through old photos, scanning them for clues. She checked old messages, looking for any detail she might have overlooked. But it was when she went through his wallet, something she never imagined she'd do, that she found something that made her blood run cold. An ID card, with a different name. Daniel Carter wasn't Daniel Carter. Her hands trembled as she held the card, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She checked the date of birth, 2 years off from what he had told her. The address? One she didn't recognize. She took a photo of the card and typed the name into a search engine, and that's when she found him. An old news article, buried deep in the archives of a small-town newspaper. A man with Daniel's face, though slightly younger, staring back at her. The article was about a missing person case. A woman, his former fiancée, had disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Sarah's heart pounded. She clicked on another link. This time it was a police report. The woman had eventually been found, alive, but shaken. She had refused to speak publicly about what had happened. But one line from the report made Sarah's hands go cold. She claimed she had been misled, manipulated, and ultimately feared for her life. Sarah stared at the screen, her pulse thundering in her ears. Who was the man she had fallen in love with? And more importantly, how much danger was she in? The hidden truth. Sarah's hands trembled as she scrolled through the article again. The man in the photo was undeniably Daniel, except he wasn't Daniel. He was someone else entirely. The name on the police report was James Whitaker. Her heart pounded as she clicked on another link, an old court record buried in an obscure legal database. The details made her skin crawl. James, Daniel, had been accused of fraud, identity theft, and manipulation. He had lured women into relationships, gained their trust, and then disappeared, along with their money, their security, and sometimes their sanity. Sarah felt sick. This wasn't just a series of small lies. This wasn't about a forgotten childhood trip or a misplaced watch. The man she loved had built his entire life on deception. She searched for more and found testimonies from other women, all eerily similar. They had fallen in love with a man who seemed too good to be true, because he was. He had changed names, moved from city to city, and always left behind heartbreak, confusion, and unanswered questions. And now he had found her. Sarah's mind reeled back to all the moments that had felt off. The late-night phone calls, the weekends away, the vague explanations, the way he always redirected questions about his past. Had he planned to do the same to her? She felt exposed, vulnerable, like she had been living with a stranger. No, worse than a stranger. A predator. Her breath came in short, panicked gasps. She needed to get out. She needed to leave before he realized she knew. But before she could move, her phone buzzed. Daniel. Her blood ran cold. The screen lit up with a text. Hey, love, on my way home. Can't wait to see you. She nearly dropped the phone. He was coming. And now she knew the truth. The question was, what was she going to do about it? Confrontation and denial. Sarah's heart pounded as she paced the living room, her mind racing. She knew Daniel, no, James, would be home any minute. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to get out before he walked through that door. But something inside her refused to leave without answers. She had to confront him. The front door clicked open. Sarah's stomach twisted as Daniel stepped inside, a charming smile on his lips. Hey, beautiful, he said, setting his keys down. Missed you. She clenched her fists. Who are you? Daniel's smile faltered. What? Sarah swallowed the lump in her throat, forcing herself to meet his gaze. I know the truth. I know your real name. I know about the other women, the lies, everything. For a moment there was silence. Then Daniel laughed, a low, almost amused sound. Sarah, what are you talking about? She pulled out her phone, showing him the article. James Whitaker, that's you, isn't it? His expression darkened for the briefest second before he sighed, rubbing his jaw. Where did you even get this? That doesn't matter, she snapped. I just want to hear you say it. Daniel shook his head, stepping closer. Sarah, listen to me. Someone is messing with you. His voice was calm, steady, too steady. This is a misunderstanding. You've been reading lies. You know me. You love me. Her breath hitched. That's exactly what he wants you to believe. He reached for her hand, but she jerked away. Don't, she whispered. His face softened. Baby, I would never lie to you. Why would I? Sarah's mind screamed at her to hold on to the truth, but his voice, so familiar, so safe, wrapped around her like a spell. I don't know, she admitted, hating how small her voice sounded. You're being paranoid, he interrupted gently. Think about it. If any of this were true, wouldn't I be in jail? Wouldn't I have run by now? He smiled, tilting his head. Have I ever hurt you? No, she whispered. He stepped even closer, his scent, his warmth, everything about him overwhelming her senses. Exactly. I love you, Sarah. I want a life with you. Are you really going to throw all that away because of something some stranger told you? Her head spun. Was she wrong? He had always been good to her, always made her feel safe. Maybe Mark had lied. Maybe the internet had twisted the truth. Maybe. Then she remembered the fake ID, the work lie, the late-night phone calls, and suddenly it all became clear. She took a step back, shaking her head. Number, you are lying. Daniel's expression flickered, just for a second, with something dark, cold, and in that moment she realized she had to get away from him before it was too late. The breaking point. Sarah's world had fractured into pieces, each one sharp and dangerous, cutting into her sense of reality. Every moment she had shared with Daniel, every laugh, every touch, had been built on lies. Her heart ached as the truth slammed into her like a freight train, and the weight of it was suffocating. She couldn't breathe. For weeks she had wrestled with doubt, with the possibility that the man she loved might not be who he said he was. She had tried to convince herself that it was all just a misunderstanding, that Mark had it wrong, that Daniel couldn't possibly be the person she had uncovered in her search. But now, standing in front of him, James, with the evidence, she couldn't deny it any longer. He had betrayed her. I can't do this anymore, she whispered, her voice trembling. Daniel's eyes flashed with something she couldn't quite place. Frustration, anger, maybe fear. Sarah, stop this. You don't understand what you're doing. You're listening to lies. Do you really think I would hurt you? His words were soothing, his tone so familiar, but they felt like poison now. I don't know who you are anymore, she said, her voice breaking. Everything you told me was a lie. You built this life with me, our life, on lies. I can't trust you anymore, Daniel. The air between them thickened with tension, and Daniel stepped closer, his eyes darkening. You're being foolish. I love you. Don't you get that? I've always loved you. But love isn't enough, she said, the words leaving her in a rush. I can't love a man who isn't real. You've made me feel like I'm crazy, like my instincts are wrong. You've gaslighted me, manipulated me, and now you want me to just forget it? A flash of desperation crossed his face. He reached for her, but Sarah took a step back, putting distance between them. I'm not the person you think I am, he said, his voice low. I've made mistakes, yes, but I never meant to hurt you. Please don't leave me. We can fix this. I'll prove it to you. Sarah's heart twisted with the memory of their good times together, the moments when she had felt truly loved. The thought of walking away from him, of leaving the man she had dreamed of a future with, almost broke her, but she wasn't the same woman anymore. The woman she had been, the one who had blindly believed in him, had to be left behind. Her self-respect had to come first. She wasn't going to lose herself for a man who had already chosen to lose her long before she had found out the truth. I'm done, she said, her voice steady now, filled with a strength she hadn't known she had. I can't do this anymore, Daniel. I can't love someone who doesn't respect me enough to be honest. For the first time, Daniel's mask cracked. His voice became sharp, almost bitter. You'll regret this, Sarah. You won't find anyone who loves you like I do. I'll find someone who loves me enough to tell me the truth, she said, turning toward the door. As she stepped into the unknown, she didn't look back. She was done fighting for a love built on lies. This time she was choosing herself. The escape. The finality of her decision felt like a weight being lifted off her chest, but as Sarah turned away from Daniel, James, the world seemed to collapse around her. The truth was inescapable now. Love without truth wasn't love at all. It was a fragile illusion, a web of lies that had ensnared her, clouded her judgment, and held her captive in a world that wasn't real. She had spent months wrapped in the comfort of what she thought was perfect, what she wanted to believe was perfect. But now, standing in the midst of the shattered pieces of her life, She knew it was time to break free. Her hand trembled as she grabbed her coat, her fingers moving automatically to gather the few belongings she had left. There was no need to pack everything, no need to hold on to remnants of a life she could no longer call hers. She didn't even glance back at the photos that lined the walls, the memories of dinners, vacations, and quiet nights in. They felt like they belonged to a different woman, a woman who had trusted the wrong man. With one final glance at the apartment, Sarah stepped out the door, the cold air hitting her like a slap. She took a deep breath, inhaling the crisp night, her senses finally starting to clear. Her heart raced as she stepped into the unknown. What would she do now? Where would she go? The future she had imagined with Daniel had just disintegrated in front of her eyes, and for the first time in a long time, she felt the weight of her own independence. She didn't know what came next, but she knew one thing for certain. She couldn't stay. She couldn't stay in a place that had become a prison of deceit. She couldn't live in a lie. As she walked through the quiet streets, her phone buzzed in her pocket. Her heart skipped a beat. Daniel. She ignored it. It buzzed again and then again. She pulled the phone out, stared at it for a moment, and then silenced it. His messages would be full of apologies, explanations, promises that he would change. But the truth was, she had heard it all before. She had given him the benefit of the doubt, tried to see the good in him, even when her gut told her something was wrong. But that was over now. She was done listening to his manipulations, done questioning herself. As she walked on, the streetlights flickered above her, casting a soft glow on the path ahead. The city felt different, larger, emptier somehow, but there was a freedom in it, a freedom she hadn't realized she had been craving. For the first time in a long time, Sarah could breathe without the weight of deception pressing down on her chest. She wasn't running from something, she was running toward herself, toward the truth, toward a life she could build with honesty, with integrity, and with self-respect. The illusion had shattered, but what lay ahead wasn't darkness. It was the possibility of something real, something worthy of her love, and that was enough. A new beginning. The days after leaving Daniel were a blur of raw emotion and quiet reflection. Sarah moved through them like a woman in recovery, both physically and emotionally drained, but determined to heal. The apartment that had once felt like a home now felt like a hollow shell, the silence louder than any argument or confrontation ever could be. She'd spent so much time wrapped up in the illusion of love that she hadn't even realized she had stopped living for herself. Now, standing alone in the quiet of her new apartment, a small, modest place that smelled of fresh paint and possibility, Sarah felt the weight of the decision settle on her shoulders. It wasn't easy. It wasn't painless, but it was necessary. With every passing day, the ache in her heart began to soften. The memories, once so vivid, started to lose their grip on her. She'd learned the hard way that trust wasn't something you could rebuild with words or promises. It had to be earned, and Daniel had taken that from her long ago. But in the silence of her new space, Sarah found a quiet strength. For the first time in a long while, she felt like herself again. Her life wasn't perfect, and she didn't have all the answers, but she knew now that she had the power to rebuild, to make decisions that were hers and hers alone, to choose honesty, to choose trust, and to choose herself above all else. One night, while sitting at her small kitchen table, Sarah pulled out a journal she had kept hidden away for years, pages full of dreams, hopes, and fleeting thoughts. She had started it when she was younger, when the world felt full of endless possibilities. And as she flipped through the pages, she found something she had forgotten. The woman she had wanted to become. She had wanted to travel, to pursue her passions, to live freely, without fear of judgment or manipulation. She had wanted to be someone who didn't just survive, but thrived. "I can still do that," she whispered to herself, the words coming easier than she expected. The next morning, Sarah woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. She signed up for a cooking class she'd always wanted to take, started planning a trip to a place she had always dreamed of visiting, and reached out to old friends she had lost touch with. She began to reclaim the parts of herself that had been buried beneath layers of doubt and deception. She wasn't the woman she had been with Daniel, nor was she the woman she thought she was. She was someone new, someone who had learned that love couldn't exist without trust, and trust could never exist without honesty. Her heart was still fragile. There were days when the weight of the past felt heavier than she could bear, and moments when she questioned if she'd ever fully recover from the heartbreak. But with every new step she took toward her own future, Sarah found that healing wasn't about forgetting. It was about learning, growing, and forging a path that was uniquely hers. And for the first time in a long time, that path felt full of light. She was free, and she was ready for whatever came next.